lecture on French astrology from Jacques Halbronn on Saturday, 10th of May, 2014. I would like to dedicate this lecture to the question of the origins of astrology. I do not believe 1 second that people were able to determine the meaning of the planets. And this is what afforded them to attribute to each planet a certain signification. But it is true that today it's different. There is a big difference between the fact that astrology was built in such and such conditions thousands of years ago, and the method we have to follow to discover what astrology is today. And we must not make a confusion between these two situations. Today, we have to discover, like Goklan Sudan, what is astrological in the world. But when astrology was created, that was not at all the problem. When astrology was created, the question was to distribute to each planet a certain role, not according to what the planet is intrinsically, of course not. How would that been possible? So, one thing is to discover what is astrology from today, and how was astrology created thousands of years ago. Most astrologers do not make the difference between these two levels. For instance, myself, obviously, I believe that a certain planet, like Saturn, was declared as being predominant, as being the basis of the whole astrological cycle. But I do not say 1 second that this was the case from the beginning, and that nature had created this sort of situation, as if we were using the Darwinian pattern for astrology. That, only nature can create things, not man. And I do not accept this position at all. So, it is not because I believe that astrologers decided what astrology would be about and what would be the elements that astrology would use, that today, when we want to rebuild astrology, we have to discover what astrology is. You see the difference between these two different levels. I have to discover today what astrology is. But I know that what astrology is has been not discovered but invented by our ancestors. In that sense, astrology is a technique, is an architecture, is a monument created by man, and that we have to rediscover, to unveil built. Gokla was not very clear about that. He said, well, there's a planet called Mars, and this planet has a certain role. It's connected with a certain population, which has a certain activity in the society. But he never said that this role was determined by mankind. At least not, if you prefer, was not determined by the sky itself. It was determined by an entity outside the sky who would decide what the sky is and how it has to be considered and approached. The same, for instance, let's take a child. Child will spontaneously throw some sort of form on a piece of paper. But let us imagine that one will tear this piece of paper in so many pieces, and that we are asked to reform this puzzle, to reconstitute this image which has been torn. It's not the same work. The work of the child writing, drawing on a piece of paper is not the same as the work of someone who has to reconstitute this same drawing. It is not the same time, it is not the same diachrony, but sometimes we are inclined to believe it is the same. Not at all. Another point that I would like to approach today is the fact that astrology is the real astrology, in fact, lies between two activities which are compromising consciousness. On one side you have astronomy, which is much more developed than astrology. And on the other side you have also something very developed, which is the astrology of astrologers, astrology of the chart, of the natal chart, of whatever chart it is. This is also infinite. So as Blaise Pascal was saying, the real astrology is trapped, lies between two infinites. The infinite of astronomy and infinite of man perceived through the chart. And I am interested neither in the astronomy of the sky, neither in the astrology of man, of the individual. What we are looking for is something in between. Juste milieu. On one hand, the real astrology, the authentic astrology, is not supposed to include all the planets of the sky, but only those stars, those planets which have been considered as useful by our ancestors and have been integrated in a sort of system. And the purpose of this system is simply to create a sort of calendar. And I'm not going to return on the purpose of this calendar. And on the other side, you have all those astrologers with the charts combining all the planets which they have heard of, all the asteroids, all the fixed stars, etc., in a sort of mixture which is comparatively as complex as the mixture of the astronomers. And this is also not real astrology to me. I'm not at all fascinated by the quantity of factors that you can combine. I am in favor of simplicity and of unity. It is a paradox because, as an historian of text, I'm very much concerned by the complexity of the information, of the data that you have to reconstitute. And it is true that in order to restore the real image of astrology, I had to work on an incredible number of elements and data. But it's the only method to rebuild, to restore astrology. It is not an end in itself, complexity. Complexity is in order, when you have to find out one factor, you have to consider a great deal of factors to isolate this specific factor. So complexity might be very much useful to apprehend simplicity. This is also diachronically separate. Finally, I would say that the proper definition of astrology is by no means the fact that astrology studies the individual. Astrology doesn't study the individual, only some sort of astromancy, divination does it. The real astrology studies mankind. So there's a human body, a human psyche, in general. On the other hand, I must say that my position towards astrology has become more complex than that. Astrology, I wouldn't use exactly those words today, I'm afraid. No. Sometimes you have old records which are used as in fact they do not correspond to your present positions. What I believe today, and it's always important to ask people what they believe today, not what they have written yesterday, or what they have thought or said before. What we are interested in is today, what is said today. And I say today that astrology has to do, in fact, with a certain cycle which is made to counterbalance mankind. So astrology doesn't describe mankind. Astrology is a disturbance for mankind. It's a sort, I would say it is an illness, but it's sort of obstacle or a handicap which has been decided upon mankind to prevent mankind to go too quickly and to perform too much. It is a drawback, something which will, it's like a prisoner, you know, it's a chain, Astrology is our chain. We are, as it were, prisoners of the cosmos by psychic chain. And anthropology is certainly defined to study mankind. Astrology is a branch of anthropology which is connected with the specific history of mankind. At a certain moment of the evolution of mankind, of the history of mankind, something happened which has a religious and theological meaning. Something happened. It's a sort of Job, you know, the story of Job, you know, in the Bible. Satan obtained from God the right to create obstacles in front of man. And these obstacles belongs to a program which is astrology. This program produces a great multiplicity of entities, of groups. I can say that about the Tower of Babel. It can destroy, it will develop many and many divisions and partitions. So, this astrology is something which will slow down the progress of mankind. It is a sort of action against the evolution of mankind. Not totally, but instead of having a sort of something clearly progressive, naturally progressing in a way, we have this an intervention which will create obstacles. An astrologer today, for me, is someone who has a pattern of these obstacles. And as I said, there are only obstacles, and there is only a part of time which is due to obstacles. It was what I call the Martian period. At the time, in fact. And the other half, on the contrary, suppresses those obstacles. And then mankind can continue to progress. And then after a certain time, return the obstacles, and so on and so forth. This is how I would constitute the history of astrology in mankind. This intervention is not exactly human in a way. It's not, at least, the expression of our mankind, our humanity. It comes from somewhere else. Somewhere else where they did not want men to go too quickly in their development. And women, in a certain way, are part of this plan, of this conspiration against mankind. They have been invented, women have been invented to produce divisions between men, to produce small groups, and each group being in difficulties with the other groups, and communication being complicated by this multiplicity of groups. So at this moment, there is a form of regression. But at the same time, all those groups will afford all sorts of people to try to express themselves for a small group, to make their own experiments. While the other system, the normal system, without this period of Mars, which I call the period of Venus, will give the power to a limited number of people who will control the whole mankind and unite it. And this is the first part of the story of Babel, unification around a few leaders, like chief meaning the head. And that's why when we speak of leaders, of dictators, of empires, there is a sort of negative approach of these things. But I think that mankind, the future of mankind, has to do with this tendency of unification. And I think that all that goes against this unification of the empires, of their leaders, is created against mankind.